really agreeing. Any comments on what he has just said?
Yeah, I certainly have certain comments. Earlier we were just discussing about the concept of cults, and I kind of like tongue-in-cheek pointed out to Rev, who is an Anglican, that the church where I grew up, the Methodist Church, was considered a cult in England, because with the Wesley as the individual there and everybody is gathering around him. I think sometimes we use the word cult liberally. I think we need to think wider than just spiritual sense. Yeah. Rev has talked about politics, there's sports, there are cultic figures who are there. There are even political figures. If you go to places like China, for example, when they talk about Great Leap, Mao Zedong and that kind of thing, there is a level of, how do you call it, almost idolization of an individual to meet certain objectives as far as it goes. I think there is a balance that needs to be observed. That, remember, we're having this discussion in the context of the freedom of religion, because that really is what we're talking about: freedom of religion, freedom of faith. And clearly what we are seeing here is an abuse of the freedom of faith. Now, where I think the government is struggling, certainly the people who are in the churches are asking the question, and I saw the statement by the EAK, which is an affiliate member of AEA, regarding where do we draw the line. For example, in technology, we know that phones can be used for terrorist matters, they can be used for conning people to get money out of them, they can be used for people to go to illicit sites where they do gambling and pornography, but we don't say no phone. We say that we need, this is something we need. How do we regulate it? Where do we draw the line? And that's where there is a bit of a tricky question. Now, in our context, the other thing that is added is the question of exercise of what is called police power. Now, not Kenya police power, but police power is really that power of state to regulate conduct within society. So one of the questions that have been asked around this context is, where was the police power exercised in this entire matter? Because this was not a situation where you'd say like the genocide in 1994 in Rwanda, where it was widespread, that things were happening in places where people could not reach for certain reasons. This is one where these are places where people do business, where people are involved in tourism, where families meet. So the question has been, okay, there is a police service that works there. There is a local administrator, a chief, there is a governor, an elected MCA. When all this was happening, is it possible to really say that this was unknown? So even before we get to should we regulate, it's have we exercised the police power properly? And I think there's a question of introspection, a question where even at the level of government, questions need to be asked and genuinely say, we failed. We can give apologies, we can say that it won't happen again, but this is a massive failure, and let's not call it anything else. It's a massive failure in law enforcement, in, what one would expect in, hopefully, where things are operating better. And it's not something that happened on one day, on the 31st of December 1999 going to 1st of January 2000. This is something that happened over a stretch of time. So it's not that kind of thing. But then also there's need for introspection as faith communities. And faith communities, yes, here it's in the context of Christians, but in this country we have Muslims, we have Hindus. There's a question of introspection, asking, what is it? Because if faith is about giving life, not taking life, then we ought to ask the question, what are we doing? What are we doing in terms of our conduct? What are we doing in terms of calling each other out when we ought to? Because sometimes the main means of crime prevention in this country is not the fact that you have given the police arms and bullets. Many times it's good upbringing, it's good company that tells you don't do this, it's not supposed to be done this way. There is a need for us to ask ourselves as organized faith communities, what do we need to do? And one of the things that I know some entities have done, the churches came together. There's an entity called Hesabika Trust, and a few churches. I know that Provost, you were involved. I know St. Paul's was also involved, Dr. Kevin. They actually came up with a code of conduct for purposes of regulating faith and saying, this is what we expect. But you know, it's a document where we're asking, we'd like you to behave this way. Dan, we'd like you, when you're on media, to wear those nice glasses and do, I mean, but you know, you can't force it.
You don't have the enforcement capacity.
There you go. Yeah, the police power. So yeah, that's just what I thought I'd
Right, and just before we take